This week, Tom Goings from Tanium is with us to discuss supply chain visibility. Then Ashley Leonard from Syxsense joins us to talk about the current state of zero trust. Finally, in the enterprise security news, whether you want insurtechs or not, they're here and you're getting them. And don't worry, we'll explain what insurtechs are. A potential deal to take Sumo Logic private, a potential deal to take Rapid7 private, 32-year-old Siren shutting down, hoping for an asset sale. A firm shorts Darktrace and releases a scathing report. Some more layoffs, but the NSA is hiring, don't worry. Codebreakers solve some 500-year-old ciphers, the real cost of meetings, and sushi terrorists. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
All right, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy National Pizza Day. This is episode 305, recorded on Thursday, February 9th, 2023. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem, Tyler Shields. How are you, Tyler?
I'm doing well. Yet another day in paradise. Pizza Day, I can get behind that. Big fan.
Yeah, there were a lot of things I could have gone with. There was Cut the Cord Day, National Toothache Day, or even National Bagel and Lox Day, but I went with National Pizza Day so that I could say pineapple on pizza is amazing. So I chose violence out of those options.
Yeah, that was not a good choice because pineapple on pizza is not amazing. It is immoral and should be deemed illegal. There's only two ways to eat pizza: cheese or pepperoni. That's it.
Anyway, that's enough from Tyler. Also joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Tytler. How are you, Katie?
Well, I have to disagree with Tyler. I think pineapple and bacon on pizza is delicious. And while pepperoni is also good, it is not the only topping that is satisfactory.
Seriously?
There are so many good pizzas, but I was dismayed this morning when I was looking up what today is, that where I live in Massachusetts, their favorite pizza is Greek pizza, and that's just wrong. No olives. Chopped tomatoes on pizza, make it soggy. Just no.
No feta cheese on pizza?
Oh. Feta cheese is fine, but olives and chopped tomatoes?
Yeah, no Greek pizza then. Okay. I'll take pizza in almost any form. I love it. Except for really greasy. I can't have too much meat on pizza. I think it gets ridiculous. Like just the amount of grease rolling off that thing. Get a paper towel, take a roll of paper towels, just roll it over there.
Just give me a good slice of New York City thin crust cheese. That's all I need. Keep it simple.
Oh yeah, that's great.
I mean, you can't really argue with that, but you did say that pepperoni is the only pizza, and sorry, no.
No, I said cheese or pepperoni, and I could do without pepperoni. If I only had to pick one, it'd be cheese all day.
No sausage?
No, and you can take your bacon and pineapple and go back to California.
Well, I've actually never had pineapple and bacon in California.
All right. Let's move on. Some announcements here. You can follow us on LinkedIn for updates across our organization, show highlights, and more. You can find us by searching for Security Weekly Productions. And I did choose the day. I did stir the pot. So I can't blame you guys for indulging me. Also, I run B-Sides Knoxville. We're about to have our 9th year, and I run a podcast. So, I'm going to plug my event here. So B-Sides Knoxville is open for talk submissions and sponsors. If you have a great talk you want to submit at a mid-sized, low-key B-Sides conference with amazing food and a hacker movie after party, check us out at bsidesknoxville.com. If you want to sponsor, drop an email to info@bsidesknoxville.com. And not to make it sound like I run the whole thing myself, that would be absolutely impossible. I have some amazing organizers that and we all pitch in. Yeah, I can't even say I do the most work on it, but Yeah, some great folks. We put a lot of effort into it every year, and we get great reviews every year. So with that, this interview is sponsored by Tanium. Today's topic is on getting visibility into your software supply chain. We're excited to have Tom Goings, Director of Product Management at Tanium, with us today. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, how's it going? And for the record, pineapple does belong on pizza.
Yes, you are outnumbered, Tyler. That's great. Also great is I noticed in your bio, you mentioned humble beginnings building a PC to play games, which I can absolutely relate to. I used to work at CompUSA back in the 90s, and I remember we got an opportunity to go to a press release event. Intel was coming out with the Pentium 3 500, and we got an opportunity to buy the processor and the motherboard for $100 each. Back when that Pentium 3 was retailing for like $700. So that was the first PC that I built myself. Was out of that Pentium 3 and motherboard. I had computers way before then, but that was the first one I built myself. I put a Voodoo 3000 in it, and Unreal Tournament played great on it.
Mine was I don't remember the exact specs. It just shows you how long ago it was in my brain, but it was a Sony processor. So it was like just a real simple motherboard processor. And we were playing Age of Empires on LAN. We knew nothing about LAN networks. We were configuring IP addresses based upon random numbers. And amazingly, it still worked. Like, I don't know how we got that network running. If I go back and think about it, I'm like, we were so lucky. I think we played a little bit of TIE Fighter versus X-Wing. So yeah,
trial and error. You just really wanted to play those. That's how a lot of us learned, right? Is just we really wanted to get something to work. Yeah. And video games are, I think, still an entry point for a lot of people into tech and security and stuff like that.
Yeah, my son was doing some consulting for a bit, helping a friend out because he was interested in building his own computer. So that just led him into like going and doing work for small companies with my friend as a kind of a sponsor. And it was just one of those things he just happened to get into. He doesn't like doing it anymore, but he still can. But yeah, that was his entry level, was video games. That was the very first thing he did.
Yep. Yeah, and I remember when that all exploded, when video cards didn't used to be a thing. Like, you might have to go get a sound blaster and set up your IRQs and figure that whole mess out. But yeah, I remember when those gaming cards first started to come out. I was working at CompUSA back then. Exciting times, very exciting times.
Oh, you just gave me nightmares. The whole IRQ setting and the driver loading and the i6 ports. Oh my gosh. Okay, I think I got to go away now. That's just too long ago. That's crazy stuff.
Yeah, the stuff you would go through, like you'd have to read the box, see what the requirements are, consider whether or not you had the money to upgrade your system so you could play that game so it didn't play like garbage. Yeah, it was a whole thing. It was a whole production that went on for you to be able to install and play and enjoy a game. I mean, if you weren't into console gaming, so console gaming was still big back then. You just buy the game and you knew it would work. But where's the fun in that? Where's the challenge?
Yeah, I think we just went through back in my day, we walked uphill both ways, the conversation with IT gaming. So
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that earlier today in a Slack also. So that's the second time. That's the second time I've fulfilled an old man stereotype today. All right, so let's run through some foundational stuff before we really get into the meat of this conversation. So let's start out with what Tanium is. For folks who don't know, I mean, I think most people know what Tanium is, but I don't want to leave anybody out. How's it sold? How's it installed? How's it used? Just if you could give us like the elevator pitch on that.
Yeah, so Tanium is an endpoint platform, and when we say endpoint platform, that means that it does both security and management on devices. Now, it's deployed as an agent, so every endpoint has an agent. and then we have a centralized infrastructure that we're able to go in at size and scale, and it's like a command and control is the best way I can describe it. For the really techie people, if there's anything that you want to do in the Tanium platform, you can write in any language that runs on the endpoint. So we're Linux, AIX, Windows, Mac, and Solaris, I believe, are the 5 that we support, and multiple versions of Linux. And so if you can write the program, you can actually have our network, or what we call as a linear chain, go out and do the work on those endpoints. So it's really, really fast. I've got plenty of stories to say about how it works, but the idea is that you can go and say, give me all of your installed applications across 320,000 endpoints, and it will come back live in about that. So it's it's just seconds. And we've verified that multiple times with multiple customers. We've had this conversation through various different ways. But that's the key, is like we are an agent endpoint tool that we use the linear chain. No size is too big. We can manage everything on the endpoint. And then we have multiple components that are installed on top of it that I consider like workflows. And so there's different things for like asset management, doing network discovery. So imagine having 320,000 Discover engines on your network. That's how our Discover service works, and just so on. So then we can do that across the security spectrum as well for like compliance, threat detection, and just multiple other pieces. Like we've got something like 14 different components. I think it's actually up to 16 now across management and security.
Right. Because once you have that engine on the endpoints, you can then build on that and do all kinds of stuff with that, from like EDR type stuff to MDM type stuff to vulnerability management type stuff to SBOM type stuff, right?
Oh, yeah. So the amazing thing about the software bill of materials that we created was it was actually built by one of our technical account managers. He built it using the endpoint platform as a what we call old school Tanium or technical account manager work, where you have a package, you deploy the package that is going to do a job. That job then writes to a file, and then you have the question or the sensor that goes around and says, give me the information that I'm looking for. And then we've incorporated it into a more streamlined workflow into the product so that you can do it now without having to know how to do all of the packages and everything like that. And we incorporated it into our client extensions so that you get the performance that you want out of Tanium. So you're not, hitting the index all of the time. It actually does that stuff. So the software bill of materials is probably one of my favorite stories right now, just because it was built by non-developer on the Tanium platform.
Yeah, that's very cool. But yeah, it seems like you already have a lot of this data. So a lot of the use cases, a lot of the modules that you're coming up with, are basically taking a look at this data and thinking, okay, what are the use cases where this data can be useful? And like, I imagine you don't have to do a ton of changes to the plumbing, to the engines that actually run on the endpoints. It's more just getting that data in a format that's useful to customers, right?
So it depends. So this is like the standard statement when you're dealing with developers and product management. Sure. The thing is, taking something that is written by someone like myself, maybe someone that's technical, can write scripts and do those types of things. We tend to focus on, let's get the data and let's get it into a location that we can do it. What makes Tanium special is when we find something like that, we can then turn it over to the developers that are paid for this type of work, and then we optimize it. We make it so that it's not going to be clunky and that it can actually scale across all of the different environments. So I may write it in Windows, but then if I hand it over to our developers, they're going to be writing it in C++ to compile down into a DLL or whatever the binary that needs to run on the endpoint. And then it's going to be efficient. It's going to be CPU and memory sensitive. So that's the key, is like, we can do things as a proof of concept really, really quick with the Tanium platform. But when we want to then make it so that it's something that's supported, it does take a little bit more time because of the attention to detail we want to put into it.
So the other foundational thing here, we've been saying SBOM for a few minutes now. What do we mean when we're talking about SBOM? Because that could be slightly different depending on what kind of product, what kind of where in tech and IT and security you are.
Yeah. So software bill of materials. So if you're not familiar, I'm going to use the analogy I love, and that is software bill of materials is like. It's cookies. Absolutely. We got to go to cookies. I enjoy cookies. I've been eating cookies for 47 years. I think I'm going to continue. But the idea is if you go to a store and you look on the back of a package, that is an ingredients list. Well, all a software bill of materials is an ingredients list. It tells you what is in that box. And most vendors are being required or asked to provide that list when you purchase a piece of software. That's great. Now, me as a purchaser, I'm going to go to the store. I'm going to grab that box of cookies. I'm going to bring it home, and I'm going to put it in the pantry, or I'm going to put it in a cookie jar, or maybe I left it in the car for snacks on the way to pick up the kids. Maybe the kids take it and put it in the room. You don't know where all of those cookies are. So the software vendor has what is referred to as a build time software bill of materials. This is we want to tell the world what we're doing, and we want to present it to the world, and we want to give access to this software bill of materials. What Tanium is doing is taking the information that is installed with that package and finding it. So as soon as you find out that there's a vulnerability in your chocolate chips, you can no longer have chocolate chips in your house. Just can't do it. Maybe there's a chocolate allergy. Oh my God, that would suck. But you've got to find all of the chocolate, not just in the chocolate chip cookies, but in anything. We do what's called a runtime bill of materials. And what we're looking for is all of the packages that we can decompress, look at, and find that information and find where all of the chocolate is in your environment so we can present it to you as soon as it happens. Not when, but when the next vulnerability happens. So for instance, a little over a year and a half ago, or a little under a year and a half ago, a lot of people lost Christmas because of Log4j. Well, if you had this at that time, if we had that package, you could actually go through and say, give me all of my Log4j files that exists in my entire environment, and it would come to you in that speed of Tanium. So that way you could then determine where is my risk in this environment? What are my application paths that are affected by this? And so that's what we are. We're a runtime software bill of materials that is looking for specific packages with libraries, and we get that information that we can get to you. We store it on the endpoint so that when we do ask the question, we can provide it. And so that's what we're doing. That's what software bill of materials in the nutshell is, and what the difference is between the two types. There's the build time and the runtime.
Yeah, and it's for most of the stuff, right? Like I was going to throw out a trigger warning there before we started mentioning Java libraries, but it's just going to happen. I've never heard anybody quite put it that way, though. Lost their Christmas, but it's totally true, like that. And it happened not just near Christmas, but it happened on a Friday. Like I don't think it was super late on a Friday, but it was on a Friday, which is always when this stuff happens. But
well, and then we had the great scare of 2022 with the OpenSSL, like critical vulnerability that was coming out.
Right.
Everybody started like, oh my gosh, this is going to be horrible. We're going to lose Christmas again. And then the actual vulnerability was released, and come to find out it's not actually a critical. Thank goodness. It's a high, and it's actually only going to be on very specific use cases, which is even better. So, we had a bit of a push we had just released SBOM. We had a bit of a push for POCs of the product because Tanium tends to go with if we can help you during this time of crisis, we're going to give you the capability to POC it. No strings attached. You can POC it. You can find your stuff. You can fix your things. You can stay secure. And we had an uptick, but then as it kind of filtered out, we saw a decline in people asking for the POC because it wasn't as big of an issue. So we almost lost another Christmas, and I know it's going to be another 6 months to a year before we have another one of these pop up. Like it's It's not if, it is when it's happening. And this is an inventory issue, not a. I mean, it's inventory at its root. Security is secondary, like knowing where stuff is, in our opinion.
Right. So I actually do. I have done privately, and I think once publicly, a talk on Equifax's postmortem, and like one of the big lessons that we take away from the Equifax breach was that they didn't have the ability. They didn't know how to find a Java library in their environment. They tried and they failed to find it. So they were absolutely aware that what was it? Struts was a big deal. The Struts vulnerability was a big deal. They treated it like a big deal. They went out looking for it. They didn't have the right tools. They didn't have the skills to use those tools. Like in some cases, those tools might have found it, but they used them incorrectly. And it was just, all the details we got about that breach because of the House subcommittee report really helped us, see and understand like what goes on in an organization when something like this happens. And I like to say, that should have been, when that report came out, that should have been, the light bulb moment for a lot of enterprises to say, okay, well, that's it. We need that ability. Like might not happen in the next 6 months, might not happen in the next 6 years, but at some point we're going to need to find a tiny Java library throughout a huge sprawling environment, right? Or maybe not a Java library. There's all kinds of.
So let's get off the Java bandwagon and talk maybe about Node.js or maybe Golang or PHP. Like any of those can have libraries in them. And so in those we cover. The thing here is, I don't know any tool that can tell you as quickly as Tanium. Now, you're right. There's learning curves, and people will, release packages. So let's say we tomorrow find out that an HTTP client, there isn't one, we don't know of any, but let's say an HTTP client tomorrow is going to be a library that's affected. How fast is it going to be before the multitude of software vendors can tell you whether they're affected or not? How many old applications are no longer being supported that sit in your environment that have, the meta files and the jar files and the Node.js and the PHP that just sit there and nobody knows? And so that's the key, is we're trying to solve this situation where you don't know what is going to be affected. You have no clue because your vendors don't know for at least a couple of days, maybe even a couple of weeks. And in fact, there may be dead branches that you have no clue about, or maybe something that you developed yourself that you don't have listed as having this type of vulnerability. So there's just this multitude of software out there that could affect you in any way, shape, or form. When we did this test as a POC, so we POC'd this for about 2 to 3, 4 months before we started investing heavily into developing it. And what we found is Log4j, even after Christmas that never was, we found customers that still had it out there. They still had it on their endpoints. We had one host that had 1,700 known vulnerabilities from open source libraries. That's just unreasonable amount. So yeah, that's just what we're seeing. But that's why we built it. There was a definite need.
Right. So I guess, maybe a question about how you find this stuff, because it's, like in the Java library case, somebody might have changed the name of the file. Like a lot of the methods I saw people using back when it was going on was looking for specific names in the files, or it might be inside a WAR file, or like there, it could be nested somewhere. And then you've got all these other languages. You've got Python, PHP, Ruby, all these other ecosystems, that have these libraries. How do you tackle that problem? How do you find stuff when it might not be named exactly what you're looking for? It could be embedded in a zip file and stuff like that. Is that all stuff that you take into account? And how do you manage that?
So yeah, we run an indexing tool on the endpoint. So part of our client extensions agent has an indexer. And what we do is we set up a subscription to all of the files that are part of your ecosystem hunt that you want. So jar war or any of those files, which we can also go in and decompress. So it's not like if it's a compiled jar, we can go into it. What we do is then we have methodologies to go through and look at what is the name of the file, what is the name that's associated with it. There's a metadata file that we use. And so we use this to decompress the ecosystem and get as much information as we can. So there's various methods, like I said, for each of the ecosystems we use. The one thing that you will, and this is going to be the same for just about any SBOM tool, build time or runtime, the one thing you're not going to be able to get around is people just completely renaming everything. Like if they rename the method, if they rename the file, and they're just copying it and calling it their own self, unless they leave log4j in there or something, it's going to be difficult because there's no way to really, like, you can't get that deep into the code. You don't look at the code, you're looking at the relationships to the files. So that is a caveat out there. If people say that, hey, we can find log4js that have been renamed, I'd be very concerned with that. But in general, I mean, it's pretty safe the way we do it. We go in, we look at the, like I said, we decompress the files and we do a look at it, and we use the metadata file, and you do just the standard methodologies. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And so for each new, so I imagine you've got libraries of content for when you find these things, how you remediate them, that kind of thing, and for each new platform that you tackle, say Golang, you've got to kind of build this whole library of information around it. Is that the case?
So actually, it's amazing. We don't. We're building the methodologies to find the libraries, and then once we have the libraries, it's just now a matter of time before the issue comes up. So each ecosystem has its own methodology of finding information. So we'll say log4j as an example has a version. So we'll gather that information, store it as a library version to a package. Package is hashed. If we can hash the libraries themselves underneath, we can do that. And so therefore we have this information that is readily available. So for instance, if someone comes out and says, if you have a db.jar with this hash, you can find it using our methodology. So you can use that against your compliance scans and various other things. We are moving into the compliance world. So right now our first phase approach was getting it just for inventory solution. And then we're going to be moving it over to compliance so we can actually do CVE checks against those components and provide you at least that information about where those vulnerabilities lay. So it's not like we have this huge database of information. We are literally going to the endpoint and finding where the libraries are. And that is our first step. Over the roadmap timeframe, like the as we grow, we do have an idea of building some content, but it's further down. Like we want to make sure that we're able to do compliance and finding stuff as best as possible.
So what does the customer workflow look like there? Like once they find it, where does Tanium do anything else for them after they find it? If like I imagine in a lot of cases, maybe in some of the cases it doesn't need to be there and they just remove it. But in a lot of cases, I imagine they want to update that library. They maybe want to make some changes. What does that workflow look like beyond the point where they actually find it? Like in the case where you said somebody had 17,000, like are they dumping that to a spreadsheet and just or generating a Jira ticket off of each one of those and just calling home and saying I'm going to be a while. Or what do they do then?
So most of the customers are using it to find where the vulnerabilities exist. So the default path. The idea here is that is the first step in figuring out what the application or the vendor is. So if it is in like a Windows environment and it's Windows program files, the Tom app, well, I can go get with my vendor for the Tom app and go contact them and see what they're doing. there's really no way to patch a library specifically that we've seen within this process. Like, because of the fact that it's on the endpoint, it's part of an app, we don't know if it's going to blow something up. The vendor has to provide that information. But we can at least find the version information that we have and then determine where that is. So that's the normal workflow. However, there's also the standard workflows of, if it's in like C user downloads, just delete it. You don't need it, get rid of it, let everybody know that that's going to happen. And that's a workflow that we can do within the tool. If you know for fact that the Tom app is version 1 with that vulnerability, and you already have version 2 keyed up to be deployed, you can auto deploy. So you can find everything that has that and just say, send it. So there's a couple of different methodologies that customers can use. One of my favorite statements so far was we just sold to a customer 100,000 endpoints for this. And it's just the inventory solution. This isn't anything else like, the compliance scans. This is just the inventory. We sold 100,000 and they did an initial POC and they said, this is a no-brainer. Just buy it. Like, this is something that we absolutely want. And so far we're doing pretty good with sales on it. Like, it seems to be effectively providing what we say, and we're keeping it very simple. We're not promising the moon. We're not promising any type of SBOM formats. It is literally just find the library when the issue occurs at this moment.
So the idea is that Tanium already has your software asset inventory index. So when the next supply chain apocalypse happens, you can just query your stuff and find it, right? But like you mentioned, the POCs, like folks saying, oh, well, I didn't prepare this ahead of time. I have no software asset inventory, and they know they need to search all this stuff, and they maybe don't want to, try and deploy regex file system searches out to 300,000 machines. Like, when they come to you and say, hey, we'd like to do a POC because we've got, a fire to put out right now. How long does that take, that initial indexing? Like if somebody does a POC, how much longer after that does it take until they can start doing these queries and getting these answers?
So there's a couple of different situations. So one, if they have Tanium, let's say they have Tanium and we need to deploy it to their endpoints.
Yeah, like something like assuming they don't have to have any political battles or
none of that stuff. Like we'll take the political stuff off the table. If you take just the fact that if they have Tanium deployed and then the endpoints already have the agents and all of that, or it's easy to do, my machine fully indexed, which is just a MacBook Pro, and I'm not a developer, was something like an hour. To be fully indexed, hitting all of the caps that we put in place, that's like, max CPU usage, max memory usage for index, so we don't, kill the system. For a server, I think it was like 4 hours. And for a developer that had well over 100,000 libraries, so I don't know how many packages that really was, maybe 50, 60,000 packages, but 100,000 libraries took 12 hours to get that information. So to index and then process it. So we're talking about, within 2 to 3 days, you could get your entire environment set up and POC'd and say, okay, where's my log4j? And as soon as some of that data starts coming back, you can actually start getting some of that information immediately. So like all of the workstations that your customers use, or not your customers, your employees use, within a day, you're more than likely getting the data back. Your servers, day and a half max. And then your developer workstations, of course, are going to be the ones that are a little bit more hairy because of all of the stuff they download and they work through, which is appropriate. Like, that's what they do.
Right. The 500,000 files they have on their system, or how?
Oh yeah, and then all the different compilers, and maybe they switch between Java and PHP and Golang. Full stack. We'll put that in quotes, like full stack developer.
Right. Yeah, funny story. Back when I was on the enterprise side, I noticed all the developers would go home at noon on Friday and they wouldn't come back. Like, they'd leave for lunch and just never come back. And I asked one of them about it once, and I found out that's when we had the full disk scan, AV disk scan scheduled, was noon on Friday. And on everybody else's PCs, it finished before they came back from lunch. It finished in like 30, 45 minutes. But the developer machines, it would take like 8 to 12 hours. So they just leave for the rest of the day because their machines were unusable. Of course, we've come a long way from that. That's back when there were single memory channels, single core CPUs. When that full disk scan launched off, you weren't getting anything done.
Yeah, and we've come a long way since our initial offering of the indexing. So we make sure that we do it in a appropriate format so that we're not, like I said, reducing utilization to impossible to use. And that goes back to what I was talking about originally, and that's why we put stuff into our client extensions. It's so that we can manage that performance and that you're able to continue to use the machine even though we're doing some of this heavy lifting in the back.
So you're a product manager. How, if I can shift gears a little bit, I'm kind of curious from your perspective here, especially with the products that you're building here. What do you think about ChatGPT? Have you and your team already taken a look at it from like a perspective of, can this do some tech writing, build some product content for us, that kind of thing?
Interesting question. So I actually have a friend who does not work for Tanium. I'm going to clear that up right away. And he will get emails and they're asking for something. And so he goes to ChatGPT and says, here's the email, business, tell them no. He then takes the stuff from ChatGPT, puts it in, makes some minor changes, and then gets responses like, that's the best no I've ever heard. So that's the type of stuff I'm hearing about ChatGPT. We've used it for some funny things like, how do I name this new module, or how do I name this new product, because I'm suck at naming, and this is what I want it to do, and then it comes up with some interesting names. So we're using it for that. I haven't heard the developers have used it really, but definitely the I guess raw content that you have to push out, like the just the verboseness of the emails, the verboseness of those types of things. I think there's been value for some people using that.
Yeah. Just curious about that, because it's something I think everybody's going to be experimenting with for a while, and probably are right now. Trying to see how much work you could potentially automate there, especially as they roll out commercial licensing and agreements, for companies to use it for stuff like that.
So my personal opinion is ChatGPT will be a lot like some of those automated HTML programs. It'll work, but will it be as efficient as if a programmer does it? So, Front Page, I think, was the Microsoft version, and if you really looked at it, it would just totally screw up the HTML. Like, it would just be horrible. So I have a feeling that would be done like, hey, create a loop that does this and checks for those, and here's your variables. Yeah, it's going to create it, but you're still going to have to go in and modify it in the context of whatever function you're wanting to do. So I think there's some value that may make it nicer than using just Stack Overflow, but I do think that you're still going to run into some of the, you need a developer to understand this fully type of situations.
Arguably, you are using Stack Overflow, right?
Exactly. That's part of it, right? That is 100%.
What was it trained on, right?
It's just, is it actually correct Stack Overflow or not? So I would hope that there was some stuff in that. But speaking of, did you see where what was it? Google came out and it had the wrong answer. Yeah. So they had trained it on the wrong information.
So what's funny about that, I was thinking about talking about that during our news segment today, but what's bad about that is that it got the wrong answer and humans saw it and humans used it for the marketing campaign anyway. That's where the problem is, and I think that's something we're going to have to get used to with this AI stuff. Like, I'm very curious, to your point, whether when they were training it on Stack Overflow, like, you get the green check mark where the person asking the question tags something as the correct answer or the answer that helped them, right? I wonder if it was just indiscriminate, just scraping the stuff, or if there was any kind of like when they go to Stack Overflow, they throw in some, custom training to say, hey, the text next to the green check mark, in that div section of the HTML is more important than everything else. Prefer that over everything else. Because if you don't, and based on my testing, like it doesn't know the difference between lies and truth, right and wrong, good answer, bad answer. Like it's just a parrot, right? It's just repeating stuff that it's heard.
Yeah, this is the same thing that I've been working through in the industry as far as like machine learning and AI and all of those things. It's it's great to say all of those things, but it really comes down to data in, and everyone always likes to say how amazing AI is at facial recognition. And I always like to tell people that aren't technical, I said, well, they've got a set series of variables that every face has. If you go to a police sketch artist, they have a series of facial structures. They have a series of noses, mouths, eyes. There's only so many different variations. And so you can train AI to look at faces and do facial recognition because you've got a confined set of data that is the same. You try to do AI on unstructured data, it's impossible. Like we are not at the point where it can take unstructured data and say, or from a data warehouse and say, okay, this is what it means. It still needs all of the machine learning and the algorithms and all of the things that we say, but that's human interface. And so it's the same thing with this. Like it's literally just saying what is a good answer for no with the context of these keywords, and it's just writing a sentence.
Yeah, and the thing I'm noticing, like people ask me all the time, like, how did you find that? Like they'll say, I was looking for something online, and I couldn't find it. And I have noticed that there is some skill in learning how to ask the AI for what you're looking for and get the answer or the type of answer or the answer in the right context that you're looking for. So already I've seen hiring like job recs, and there's even a website, PromptBase, where people sell the prompts that they use on these AIs to get the output that people are looking for. So I think it's super interesting. Like just like with search engines and with voice assistants, like you have to teach yourself how to ask them correctly so that you can get the answer you want, which is not how this technology's sold or marketed or supposed to work. But they can still do useful things if we learn, how to structure the query correctly, right?
Yeah, this has been ongoing since, Google. We had so back in the day, we had an IBM server that had an issue, and we had a night shift worker, really good friend of mine, and his Google capabilities were amazing. Like he could find stuff, and he just figured it out. He could speak the machine language, and we couldn't figure out everything. Like those of us on the day shift, we were looking for all of these different things, and we said, hey, can you see if you can figure this out? He found an obscure German website with the exact issue and the fix, and it was like one answer, and it was in German, and he had to use Google Translate to figure it out and all of those things. But yeah, that's like you look at him and you're like, how did you find this? He goes, well, I just kept searching, like kept zeroing in like on these things using different keywords, and found it in German. That was the craziest thing I've ever heard of Google, and this was in mid 2000s.
Yeah. It's well, and I think it's appropriate for the conversation we're having, right? Because one of Tanium's biggest features is helping you find things, right? Oh, so it's interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to bring it back full circle, right? Before we end the interview.
So yeah, I've been in IT since, well, the bio says like 98, and one of the things that shocked me about coming to Tanium is just the speed and scale that we can get the information with the endpoint management. There's the endpoint platform. I was used to star networks. You have a hub, and then if you need to get more information, you can only do 3,000 agents. You need another one, and you need 3,000 agent. 3,000 devices. You could do agentless and all of that. And so when they told me that it could do this, and this was, starting new hire training 2 years and 2 months ago, I was like, this is vaporware. This can't be true. There's no way that somebody figured this out. And when you see it in action, it is almost unreal that you can do stuff like this that fast. The ability to say, go give me all of your installed applications from, the largest networks in the world, million endpoints, and it comes back in moments, is just unbelievable. And as I stated at the beginning, the power of Tanium is not the modules. The modules are great, but it is the platform, and it is the go give me this information, pull it back, and present it in seconds. And then, like I said, if you have 100,000 endpoints and you want to do a discovery scan on your entire network, we can do that with our endpoints. Like, that's what they do. They're going to go and do ARP cache or pings or nmaps across the white space between their agents. And so now, instead of it taking, just something like a discovery scan can take months with a standard agent type of architecture with other tools, we can do it in hours for 100,000 endpoints and find things that nobody has ever been able to find because it's either not online. We're doing it continuously. We've had customers find Xboxes and PlayStations on their network. And in that instance, maybe it was a bad thing, maybe it wasn't, but just finding that type of stuff is security or concerns. So yeah, Tanium is second to none when it comes to just the endpoint, the platform. The endpoint platform is by far the best thing that I've ever seen. And that's not just me because I'm wearing Tanium. I mean, if I worked somewhere else and I found out about this, I would say it's a lie. And then when I see it, I'd be like, everything in my power to bring it in. It does 80 to 90% of everything you're ever going to need to do on an endpoint. If you know what you're doing. Again, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got to put that caveat in there because I don't want anyone going like, but Tom said, it does everything.
Yeah. So Tom, as we wrap up here, just one final question for you. As a product manager, and I might be setting myself up for failure here if you're not allowed to talk about it, but what do you have on your roadmap that you're most excited to get out in 2023?
So SBOM or anything?
Anything as a product
anything
manager at Tanium. Yeah.
So we are continuing to invest in software bill of materials. There's some things that we're going to be coming out that we're going to try to figure out application dependencies, usability. That's super exciting from an SBOM standpoint. But my most exciting thing is we are really looking to do more of a data aggregation. So if Tanium is an endpoint management piece, we need to be able to pull in data from third-party tools to take action on that endpoint. It is probably the number one request I've had from our customers, and we are investing in it. We're calling it Asset Graph. We threw it out there at Converge, so it's not like it's super secret. But that's the thing that I'm working on that is most exciting right now, is the fact that we're going to be able to take in more information from third-party tools so something like business services, criticalities, and saying, go patch all of my ticketing servers or all of my catering servers, or go get me the if there's any bad libraries, circling back to software bill of materials, on just my ticketing boxes, because those are the ones I'm really concerned about and I want to look at today. So that's the exciting thing for me, is how we're going to integrate into a data layer that is more concise and appropriate across the entire platform.
All right. Yeah. So good answer. Third-party integrations, definitely. Yeah. Whatever data you can't get directly from your engines. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff out there that's good context for the data that you've already got.
Yeah, and we can do a bit of it today. It's just on scale. Like, we're really point solution for a lot of those now, and we want to be able to do it more like whatever the customer wants. It makes it easier for us to then move faster. So, instead of having it be gate kept by devs, we can actually have customers build it, or, our wonderful TAMs, or even me, I could build it. Like, that could be something that I could do on my spare time whenever I get some.
Great. Great stuff, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. And stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk the state of Zero Trust with Ashley Leonard from Syxsense.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to go ahead and take off.
Thank you. managing and protecting the world's grueling number of endpoints, enabling Tanium's customers to see, control, and protect every endpoint everywhere. Tanium's mission is to provide certainty in uncertain times with the industry's only converged endpoint management. Trusted by the U.S. military and the majority of the Fortune 100, Tanium helps manage and protect nearly 30 million endpoints. Tanium, the power of certainty. Visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2023 full conference pass. Yes, it is time to start thinking about RSA. Hopefully you already have your hotel and your airfare and stuff like that fills up quickly. The RSA Conference will take place April 24th through 27th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2023. and use the code 53UCyber. So it's 53 letter U Cyber. We hope to see you there. All right, Ashley Leonard joins us today to talk about advancing zero trust priorities. Ashley is the CEO and founder of Syxsense, which is the unified security and endpoint which is in the unified security and endpoint management space. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Hi, pleased to be here.
Yeah, pleased to have you. It's an interesting topic because usually when we talk about zero trust, we talk about this huge nebulous thing, that's you got 100 different vendors and they all have to work together. It reminds me a bit of talking about NAC back in the day, if you recall network access control, where, it's like the idea, the picture is all well and good, but getting, 47 vendors to all work together to make it work correctly is kind of a challenge. And that's why I kind of like your approach here is that for it to work, it doesn't have to depend on 47 vendors all working nicely together.
Yeah, I completely agree. If you look at kind of NAC technology, you're quite right. It was a constant challenge to get the vendors to work together, and then once they were, to keep them working together, right? Because if that breaks, it takes the whole system down. So at Syxsense, what we've done is take a very different approach. I think for many people, actually understanding what zero trust really is a challenge, shall we say, because if you think about it, to me, zero trust is more of a methodology, and certainly software vendors can help and assist you on your kind of zero trust journey, but we're really just part of that journey. So the Syxsense approach is different in that we're, as a solution, allow our customers to get started on that journey with zero trust with just our tool. We can certainly integrate into other tools as well to enhance the capabilities, but you really can kind of get started on that journey today.
Right. So let's just let's maybe lay some foundation on zero trust and what the goal is here, what the customer pain point is that you're trying to solve here, because Syxsense does a lot more than just like the zero trust thing. Do you consider that a feature? Is that do you sell it as an additional module? Because like the main purpose of it is managing your endpoints, right?
Yeah, we're a unified security and endpoint management vendor. So what we've done is we've brought together security and endpoint management technologies into a single tool, single license, single agent. And zero trust is really just part of that journey. And I view it as actually just a natural extension of the journey, because as an endpoint management vendor and a security vendor, we actually know about the state of a device in real time. We know whether that endpoint can be trusted. Does it have any critical security vulnerabilities? Are there any critical patches that are missing? Where's the device physically located? Who's logged in? When was it last logged into? So we know a lot about that device or endpoint, and then we can use that data to make decisions about whether a user or an endpoint can access trusted resources. And it can all be done in real time. So again, I think back to your point, it's really just an evolution of where we think the market is moving with unified security and endpoint management.
Right. And is there So the question about, like, is this a separate module? Do you have to be at a certain tier to be able to use this, or is this included with any use of the product?
Yeah, great question. So Syxsense is divided into 3 different tiers. We have our Manage platform, which is basically a kind of core IT management and patching technology. We have Secure that adds on top of that management platform vulnerability scanning, so security vulnerability scanning. And then our Enterprise module adds on top of that the Syxsense Zero Trust, but also the ability to do things like automatic security remediation. We have a whole drag and drop workflow engine. So the Zero Trust capability is in our Enterprise tier.
Gotcha. Thank you. And Katie, did you have some questions? I know Ashley has an interesting report I want to kind of dive into and talk about a bit. But before we get there, I want to make sure my co-hosts have a chance to ask any other questions about the product itself.
Sure. Yeah. So when we talk about Zero Trust, and you mentioned that it's more of a methodology or a principle or a framework, and then you mentioned journey. So can you help our listeners understand, where does that journey start? Does it have to start in one place? How should they progress? Is this an all or nothing type of strategy? Where does Zero Trust work and how? I know that was a lot of questions, but it's just they all tie together, I think.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. So we'll start with the kind of first piece, right, which was methodology. So with the methodology, right, the difference, I think, with Zero Trust, and the reason it's a methodology is that the way that you look at your endpoints is that you assume everything is untrusted. So you start from that approach, that everything is not trusted until it can be proven to be trusted. So that's really the methodology. And so when it's the reverse of kind of how you perhaps looked at things in the past, where you looked at, here's a resource that's an important resource, and I'm going to control who can access it. Well, you have to assume everyone is untrusted, everyone's been compromised until they can prove that they're not. Now, as to kind of how you would get started with implementing the Zero Trust methodology, it is a journey, and it's kind of one of those journeys that doesn't really end. It's the way I like to describe it, it's more of an iterative process. So you can get started very, very simply with Zero Trust. And the way I would start approaching a Zero Trust project would be to do an inventory of the technologies that you use today. Many of the tools you use today can be leveraged in your Zero Trust journey, whether you're using endpoint management technologies already, which I hope you are, whether you're using asset discovery, attack surface management tools, two-factor authentication tools, all of these technologies can be used. So this is not necessarily a rip and replace approach. But you want to kind of start with that inventory of your tools. And then I think the next step is to understand what your risks are, what are your kind of high priority targets within your organization, and then what are your assets that you're managing. And still surprising today how many organizations don't fully know all of the assets that they're actually using. I was listening to the previous interviewee from Tanium, right? And I completely agree, actually, with what he was saying, that it's a constant challenge knowing what assets you actually have in your organization. We actually just did a survey with Enterprise Strategy Group, which we released actually I think yesterday with them. And some of the research we did with them came back with only, I think it's 45% of organizations are managing more than 75% of their endpoints, which is quite chilling to think about, right? That only 45% of the organizations are managing more than 75% of their assets. So, it is a challenge to know what you have out there in the environment and then what they're connecting to. So that's where I would start the project. And you can start with very simple things like using two-factor authentication tools to make decisions about whether particular resources can be accessed. Or you can kind of step it up to a technology like ours, where we take it to the next stage, where we actually know the current security posture of the device in real time, and you can then use that to actually enforce those access controls. But
so, in your opinion, is starting at the endpoint the best place to start? Is it starting at the data level? If somebody has to do a stepwise approach, which seems pretty likely because you can't just zero trust all the things, is, in your opinion, endpoint the better place to start, or do you want to go straight for these so-called crown jewels?
Yeah. Well, there's pros and cons to either, right? So the crown jewels you obviously want to protect. So whatever you can do to protect the crown jewels is going to be absolutely vital. But again, with the zero trust approach, what you're looking at is who's accessing those crown jewels. So you're both the device and the user, and then you're making decisions, or you're assuming they're untrusted until they can prove that they are trusted. So again, that approach is a little different because it's kind of a outside-in type of approach. So it's a little bit different than some of the other ways of looking at it.
So that's really why device hygiene is so important. And, it's not just the user, it's not just their credentials, it's what else is on that device, what else can access that device, what policies are in place, what patches are used, etc.
Yeah, it's even more than that. So you think about what's happened recently with COVID, right? Well, it's getting behind us a little bit now, but when COVID hit, everyone went home and started working from home. So they took their laptops, etc., home. Well, if you look at kind of traditional security methodologies, a lot of them, the way they worked is, I like to describe them similar to a castle methodology, where you want to have high walls, right? You put a expensive firewall in place, and you have gates, and you can control access through the gates with VPNs, and it's kind of this castle mentality. And you build the high walls, and you're going to protect your organization. The problem is, once you're inside the walls, there's not much there to protect the organization. So think back to COVID. The devices went home. They went on to home networks. The kids were at home as well. They're on the same Wi-Fi networks. Who knows what your children are up to on the internet, and what they're potentially exposing their devices to, and then potentially yours. You pick that device up. You now come back into the office for a meeting. You plug into the corporate network, and you got a problem. And that's really, I think, where that zero trust approach can really help.
Yeah, and just to unpack something you said earlier, I've talked to a lot of security leaders, and a lot of them have just accepted the fact that, they'll only be able to get asset discovery and then management, even less, to a certain percentage. And 70-80%, I've heard a lot of security leaders say, I'm good if I get to 80%. Like, we're not even close to that yet, Mm-hmm. And I think, to unpack something you said earlier, that's a less scary number, I think, if you do have these choke points, like MFA, IAM, identity gateways, things like that, where you can prevent the stuff you don't know about from accessing your most critical data and resources, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I completely agree. I will say, though, that there's, from the survey we did, there's a direct correlation to the amount of unmanaged devices and the number of breaches that those organizations have gone through. And I was actually really surprised at just the level of honesty. And it was obviously an anonymous survey, but we had over 300 respondents, and their organizations typically range between 1,000 and 5,000 endpoints was the vast majority, but we had larger enterprise respondents as well. But I can certainly tell you that based on the results from the survey, there is a direct correlation to the number of unmanaged devices and the number of security breaches those organizations have experienced, as you might expect. I'll actually share one other interesting piece of data from that as well, which was interesting. We asked the question around how many security tools these organizations were using. Because, hey, we're a security software management vendor, right? And we found out that there's actually a direct correlation to the number of tools you use and the amount of breaches you have. And by the way, it's not necessarily the way you might think. The higher the number of security tools you have, the higher the number of breaches you have, which is a very interesting statistic.
Very interesting. So this is actually something I've been talking about in some of my talks. Is I've noticed, again, I talk to a lot of security leaders, and just from my history pen testing, the companies I had the hardest time with seem to have the least number of security tools, but they really use those tools. Like they use 98% of the features. They knew them really well. They knew how to configure them and use them. And then I would run into these other companies, and I've seen them from both sides, both from the pen testing side, and I created a company that did some consulting services as a result of my pen testing experiences, just to help people finish these deployments, because they'll buy these products, they'll throw them out there, they're all misconfigured, they're not using half of the great features. Sometimes vendors will bury some of the best features really deep in the configurations. Less so these days. I saw that more with like the McAfees and the Symantec's back in the day. But generally, I've had this kind of theory, and I love to hear that your survey is pulling this out, that just a distraction of the number of tools in the market and the new shiny things, and the overhead that you end up with from owning all these tools, is behind a lot of this. So, why people aren't good at doing security, because they've got so many tools to do it. There's not enough time to configure and use them all properly.
I completely agree. I think a lot of companies think that they can solve a problem just by buying a tool, and we know that, as you do, that's just not the case. You got to have the experience and skills to be able to use these technologies, to properly implement them and maintain them in order for them to be effective. And so just buying a product doesn't solve the problem. And again, frequently more tools actually can be more risk as well. Just look at a couple of years ago, right? The SolarWinds breach itself. So the less agents I think you have on the endpoints as well, the higher the security posture of the endpoint. And that kind of comes back to, I think, the Syxsense value proposition, where we're unifying security and endpoint management, reducing the number of agents that are needed on the endpoint and the number of tools you use.
I would love to see, for every given breach, the ratio of employee to security tool, or security employee to security tool. I would love to see that ratio for every company breached.
Yeah, that would be a fascinating number. That was not a question we asked in the survey. How many employees do you have in security and how many in management? But I agree, that would be an interesting number. And then, of course, how well trained they are. 'Cause it's not just about the number of people, but it's also that experience. And it's so difficult to get skilled security people nowadays. They're in such high demand.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some of the zero trust results here. You asked in the survey a lot of questions about the current status people are in their zero trust journey. And if I were to just guess without looking at your survey data, I would guess most people are in this area of, yes, we're aware of it. It sounds attractive. We want to do it. But we're just completely befuddled and in some state of confusion, vision, right? like no actual work, but it gets talked about a lot, kind of like a digital transformation, right?
Yeah, I walked around RSA last year. I know you were talking about that earlier, and Black Hat, and you see that in all the vendors' booths, right? But when you actually ask them, well, explain this to me, explain how you deliver this, it starts to get really, really confusing. So back to the survey, though. So what we found in the survey, to your point, 62% of the respondents to the survey are currently evaluating zero trust, but only 4.8% have actually implemented something. So I think that completely bears out what you were just saying. A lot of people looking at it, they like the idea. It makes sense. Zero trust makes a ton of sense. But it's really confusing about kind of how you start on your zero trust journey.
Yeah, it sounds a lot like a segmentation project to me. Like we're currently evaluating. Like, the translation is forever in a holding pattern, right?
Yeah. It's to the question I think Amy asked earlier, right, about how do you start? And because there's not a clear laid out roadmap, I think, because it is more of a methodology that everyone is untrusted and everything is untrusted until it can prove that it's trusted, and that's really what zero trust is. It's difficult to figure out how to get started. So as we mentioned earlier, I think you start with that inventory of what tools you currently have, because many of them today are going to help you on that journey. And then what assets you have and what data you have. And that's really where you start that process. And then technologies like Syxsense can really help. We have asset discovery capabilities, so we can scan across all of your networks, looking for all of your assets that you have. And then you're able to, with Syxsense, specify what your high priority crown jewel assets are, and then start to build what trust actually looks like for your organization. And I think that's also really interesting on kind of your zero trust journey, is that it's not really a one size fits all, or even one size fits one organization. For example, right, accessing, let's say, email. Email's important. Obviously, if email gets breached, it can be very disruptive to your organization. But if an individual's email is breached, it's a little bit more limited, potentially, depending on who it is. So your zero trust rules around accessing email could be very different than accessing the payroll system. So as an example with Syxsense, what you'd be able to do is to say, well, for accessing email, we need to make sure that you've been recently authenticated, you're coming in from a known location, and you're fully patched. But if you're accessing the financial systems, well, that's different. Now, you can only access them if you're physically located on this particular network. If you have no critical software vulnerabilities, you have no critical security vulnerabilities as well. So you can kind of build what trust looks like depending on the asset that you're controlling access to with Syxsense.
So let's drill a bit deeper into that, because you're already going in a direction that I was going to take us next in talking about how Syxsense actually enforces zero trust and does zero trust, which it sounds like. It almost sounds like NAC, almost sounds like network access control, where you have a list of requirements that have to be met, a policy that states, okay, you've got to be this tall to enter Salesforce or whatever the application might be. And then a list of the different, SaaS network resources, SaaS assets, things like that employees might need access to. And you could maybe have a policy for each of those, right? That's what it's sounding like to me.
It is a little bit like that, I would agree, except the technology is implemented as a combination of SaaS technology and the agent on the endpoint. So it's a kind of combination of the two, along with integrations into other technologies as well, like two-factor authentication tools. So it's a combination of two. We're not reliant on the network at all to enforce this. It's being implemented and enforced at the endpoint level, which is different than NAC.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I didn't want to compare it directly with NAC. It's more like the, I guess the general approach, like the idea of, okay, you've got requirements and then resources, and then you've got to kind of tie those two together with some kind of policy. It says, okay, here's what you need to do to access it. Like, for example, Duo had a tool. I don't know if they still have their Beyond Core tool, but it did something similar, and it did it from kind of like an endpoint focus. And it was like, it didn't go super deep. There wasn't too much you could do with the policy, but basically you could say, you got to be fully patched. You have to have AV on and working and up to date to be able to access these resources.
Yeah, and I think what we've done there is, because we're an endpoint management and security product, we can take this just to a whole different level of depth on the endpoint. And we have with Syxsense a live real-time connection to the endpoint and at scale. So with Syxsense, unlike a lot of other security vendors that work using polling technology where their agents poll into the server, Syxsense actually has a live connection to your endpoints, which allows us to make informed security decisions in real time on the endpoint. That is very different. And because also, again, we have the history of the device. So the Syxsense asset scanner, for example, when it scans the endpoint, it's scanning all the normal stuff, the hardware and the software on the endpoint and the files on the endpoint, all the normal things you would expect. But we're actually keeping a full history of all this and then tracking how it changes over the life of the endpoint. So you can see kind of unusual things happening on the endpoint. You can see things changing on the endpoint, and how they change could also influence that decision about trust, rather than just a snapshot in time of how the device or endpoint looks right now, this second. We certainly have that, but that ability to look at how it changes over time is pretty unique.
So in terms of risk, a couple minutes ago you talked about risk and risk decisions. How does the product handle risk? Because risk is very subjective. So is there an ability for your customers to refine it based on their business policies? Do you give a risk score? How do you handle that? I'm really curious.
Yeah. So Syxsense has what we call the Syx score, which is a risk score based on the risk that we perceive on the endpoint. So we track risk in a number of ways. We use industry standards. We use things like CVE scores, for example, looking at a particular vulnerability and how risky that is. But you can actually get very misleading data if you just look at a CVE score, because you're looking at just an individual vulnerability with a CVE score. And as we know, many of the attacks that happen today put multiple vulnerabilities together to create the breach. Because we have that complete picture of the endpoint, we're actually able to better, we think, categorize the real risk of the endpoint. So we're looking at, again, all the complete picture of the endpoint. We certainly take into account things like CVE scores, but we'll also look at, are multiple vulnerabilities present on the endpoint? How's the endpoint configured? Is there a mixture of different types of endpoints on the network? Because all of these could be factors in really how dangerous a particular vulnerability might be. So we score it through our Syx score risk system.
And is there any customization that companies can do to maybe, weight something a little more importantly, if that's mission or business critical to that individual business, or is it just an algorithm based on some of the data you pull in?
Yeah, the Syx score itself is an algorithm, so it's not really possible to weight it. What you can do is create rules around, let's say a patch has just been released by Microsoft. And so, okay, technically that patch is needed on the endpoint, but it was released 2 hours ago. And so you may want to do is give yourself 24 hours to remediate that patch before you block access to a critical resource, right? Because that's the other element of this is with, I think, zero trust that's really scary for many organizations is that it can be really impactful to business operations. What you don't want to do is to incorrectly block access to resources as well, which could impact payroll, right? Counting people can't log in, they can't run payroll just because it happens to fall on a Patch Tuesday. So yes, you do have those types of capabilities. And then also you yourself can decide what trust looks like for your organization. As we talked about, not only can you define trust based on the resource, but you define it the way that you want to look at it as an organization. Your company may be more comfortable with people accessing the financial systems if they're located, let's say, in the UK as well as the US, because that's where you do business. That's normal business operations, where others may insist that no, financial systems can only be accessed if you're physically inside the United States. So you can define the rules based on your business requirements.
That's great. In terms of unmanaged devices, you mentioned earlier that they're the most likely to get breached. Not a huge surprise there. What happens when companies have an abundance of these unmanaged devices, something they can't put an endpoint agent on, something they can't push policies or updates to? How does your product help that?
Yeah, that's a really challenging run, right? So we obviously support all the major operating systems of Windows, Mac, Linux, and we also support mobile devices as well. But there are a subset of devices, especially IoT devices, that are challenging to manage. And I think the problem that we and other security vendors have is the lack of standards around those technologies. It's rapidly evolving space, isn't it? So IoT is certainly a major challenge for organizations. And today, I think the best approach there is to look at segmentation at network level with those untrusted devices to make sure that their ability to access any of those crown jewels that we talked about earlier are exceedingly limited. So that really is the best approach, I think, at the moment. But things are rapidly developing in IoT management, and I think you're going to see more advanced capabilities coming out in the very near future.
What do you see happening? This is a little bit of a pivot with the work environment. As you said, we were all home for a really long time, and then people started going back to offices, but it's so flexible. A lot of people don't have a set schedule. Their hours are kind of anytime they want them. They can work from home, they can work from the office, they can work from the coffee shop, wherever, because companies learned that they can get better productivity out of people if they give them a certain amount of freedom. So how does that affect the zero trust strategy that a company has to put in place? And how does it affect how somebody would approach endpoint management?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So we actually asked the question when we did the survey as to how many of your organizations are managing remote employees. And I don't think the results there will be surprising. It came back at 97% of surveyed respondents have to manage remote employees. So again, no surprise. Now, kind of how you manage them, well, I think, again, it comes back to that categorization. You start by categorizing the data itself and identifying the risk profile of the resources that you're trying to access. And then you set up different rules based on the criticality or the risk of the resource and data that you're accessing. So is it okay that you can access your email from a coffee shop? Yeah, probably. Be better if you had the VPN running. So maybe you make that as a requirement before you can access it with the zero trust system. But you don't want to be on a public Wi-Fi, perhaps. But it's okay that if you're connecting through from a coffee shop. But should you be able to access the payroll system from the coffee shop? Probably not. So that ability to set the rules, not just based on the endpoint, but also based on the resources that you're actually accessing, I think is really critical there. But it's a challenge. Yeah, managing remote employees is certainly a challenge, but it's also an advantage. We're growing very rapidly as a company, and we've been talking to a lot of the people we've been hiring. We ask them why they're leaving their current company. Often the feedback we're getting is that they're being required to come back into the office and they don't want to go to the office full time anymore. So it's an advantage for some companies when you can offer remote positions to your employees.
For sure. And that's why Zero Trust is like perfectly positioned for it, because it's one of the ways that companies can get a better handle on it. In terms of your clients and the types of people who are more likely, are you seeing adoption in terms of certain sectors, more regulated sectors, or big companies, small companies, or is it all over the board? I know that in the data, we obviously have a little view into the report here, which is great, but you talk about a lot of companies who are thinking about it. They're on the precipice of maybe wanting to do something, but as far as the real numbers go, can you talk generally about the types of clients who are most interested and actually implementing at this stage?
Yeah, only was it 4.3% of people are actually implementing something. So that number is pretty small, but it's projected to grow very rapidly over the next 2 years. So it's a pretty small subset today that are implementing it. And again, I think it's because it's confusing as to what it is and how you get started. So that's a challenge. But if you look at kind of the companies that are, it tends to today be the more sophisticated companies, and often they are compliance driven. So to your point, I think you mentioned, so if a company has to meet compliance requirements, they tend to be earlier adopters of this. So we see a lot of people who deal with HIPAA, PCI, some of the financial compliance requirements. They tend to be the earlier adopters of this type of technology, but we think it's going to spread very rapidly.
Well, hopefully, with only 4-point-something% adoption, there's definitely market growth on this, and it's pretty amazing that. Considering how long the term has been out there and all that uptick that we saw at RSA between maybe 2016, 2018, that time period, talk about zero trust, that we're still sort of in the same place with adoption.
Yeah, I agree. It's surprising, and I think the vendors can do a lot to help, but it's a lot of it's to do with it just being more of a methodology. It's not something you can just buy a solution. You asked the question right at the beginning of our discussion today about kind of where does this end, and it doesn't. It's an iterative journey, right? I would start with the low-hanging fruit, which we talked about, right? The endpoints, protecting the crown jewels, get them secured first with zero trust, and then you start again, and you move down to the next level of resources and the next level of data and get that done. And then you move down again. And then by the time you get to the bottom, guess what? There'll be some new technologies and new stuff, new types of endpoints that are coming into the organization. You're going to have to start the thing all over again. So it really is an iterative process to keep tightening and tightening security within your organization.
That's I can't think of a better place to wrap there, but Ashley, do you have any other insights you wanted to share from the surveys, or anything you wanted to mention that you hadn't had a chance to yet at this point?
Well, if you're interested in taking a look at the survey results, come to our website at syxsense.com, syxsense.com, and you can take a look at the survey results directly from there. So love to be able to show you more information about it.
And we do have that link in the show notes, so you can also check out the show notes if you need to find the link directly to that. All right, Ashley, thank you for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today. This was really great.
Thanks for your time. Nice to meet everyone.
All right, we'll be back in a few moments with the weekly Enterprise News. Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Fortra helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automation. Take your engagements further by pairing with our red teaming tools from Cobalt Strike and Outflank. Learn more at www.securityweekly.com/core security. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And there's a lot of cool ones in there that we did last year. And now it's time for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. It is that time. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW305 if you want to follow along as we go through the news. We don't always get through all the links, but I cut out a lot of stuff. Everything that gets posted to the show notes is posted to the show notes is probably worth checking out. For everything you see there, there's at least 50% more that I've cut out and just not even bothered including it. And then we won't even get through all those. So be sure you check out those notes, see what you're missing. All right, shall we start with this one was a little bit fun to go through because we have a funding section, an acquisitions section, and then a defunding section this week.
Ooh, those are always fun.
I called it defunding for the companies that are having trouble going out of business. It's not typically something you need a section for when you're talking about security vendor market trends.
We could call it the cybersecurity dumpster fire section.
That's too long as a header, though.
It's also too mean. It's also way too mean.
Well, we could use. Is there a dumpster fire emoji? That is pretty mean.
It's super mean because, in all honesty, many of them are not dumpster fires, right? There might be a victim of circumstance with regards to market downturn or, an inability to predict a couple of whale deals falling out. Like, it's not always a true dumpster fire, although in looking at the list that you provided for this week, some of them definitely are dumpster fires.
One of them is at least one of them is a dumpster fire.
Yeah, exactly. I just don't want to be mean, like, universally across the board and do a dumpster fire section. That would just be awful.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't do that. Though I'm sure Gus could come up with some great graphics if we did that as a theme. So yeah, I found
almost like what we could do, Adrian. We could do crying unicorns, a unicorn tears section.
Mm-hmm. Crying unicorn.
Yeah, a unicorn with tears.
But what if it's a zombie corn? Would we have a crying zombie corn?
We could. It's high potential.
Or is that redundant?
All right, continue.
Are zombie corn's brains on the outside of his head?
And she said it was such a straight face. That's the best part.
All right. Yeah, so I think we've got a ton of these now. These, like we had just been calling them, I don't know what we were calling them. There is a term that's more of a formal term, and I have to look it up every time for cyber insurance companies that are basically authorized to price a policy. MGAs, is that right?
I don't know.
MGAs and MGUs, we mentioned them. We talked about it a little bit when we had Heidi and some of the folks from Forrester on, but yeah, they're calling them insurtechs now. They've come up with a portmanteau, a combination of insurance and tech, and yeah, the term is MGA, Managing General Agent, or MGU, Managing General Underwriter. So I don't know if these companies qualify for that. I still don't know enough about cyber insurance to understand if I'm using those correctly. I don't know if these are MGAs and MGUs. But yeah, they're calling them insurtechs. I guess the idea is you get, even if the insurance policy isn't with the tech company, like you're getting it through the tech company. So maybe it's kind of like a neobank situation where if you have an account with Chime or Current or any of those neobanks out there, Rip Simple, you don't actually have, they're not a bank, they're a tech company. So your actual account is sitting in a bank. It's an actual checking or savings account at the underlying bank. They just kind of wrap this the SaaS software layer. Well, and it's more than that, right? Like it's, you're using a neobank because they don't have any fees for anything, which they don't have because they don't have any branches, so they can make all the revenue they need just off of interest and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's really neat to see. I mean, you clearly have a better grasp on how that stuff works than I do. I didn't even know those terms, but it's neat to see how combination of security technology, risk enumeration, risk quantification technologies can be used to, more accurately create insurance that can actually be delivered, right? It's kind of neat to see that coming around. It's kind of like the old trackers in the cars, right? The trackers in the cars were always said, eventually it'll lower your insurance down, and feels like that's very similar by combining the technology and the general underwriting.
Yeah, and the two we're talking about here, stories number 1 and number 3, are Box Insurance, and which I believe is a Canadian startup, Toronto-based insurtech, and then the other one is a German company called Baobab. Is that how you say that? Baobab? It's like the tree. I'm not sure how to say that.
You got me on that one. Can't help you there.
Yeah. So interesting trend. I'm going to have to start making a list of all these because I'm pretty sure we're over half a dozen and we're closer to a dozen now of these. Actually, I've got the list started.
And they're all micro. They're all micro in size, Adrian. And do you have any US based?
Yes, sure. So no, they're not all small. These two just happen to be emerging, just grabbing their seed at this point. Their seed funding rounds. But Corvus is a pretty big one. Coalition is, I think, the biggest one that I would put in this insurtech category. And then you've got AtBay is another one that we've covered, and Alpha Secure. Maybe Ridge Global and Mitigate Cyber. I had more on my list than I thought I had.
That's a pretty healthy list. The market's clearly forming.
Also, Resilience, I think, is one also. So I'm going to have to go through this list, and I suspect within this list there might be several categories, and maybe these aren't directly comparable. But yeah, it's definitely something to dive into a bit deeper. Maybe we can, maybe we can find some VCs, some folks that are actually investing in this space to come on and get interviewed and explain it to us a bit more. All right. See, the story number 2, the only reason I included this, there's a lot of Web3 stuff I just leave out because it's just noise to me personally. But this is one of the first ones I've seen actually tackling what I think is the biggest issue for consumers and cryptocurrency, which is losing your stuff, getting your stuff stolen. One of the features of the blockchain is that once it's gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. So it's unclear to me if this company is doing asset recovery for companies, for law enforcement, for consumers, or like all of the above. But they're doing they're attempting some kind of asset recovery. And we know asset recovery is possible, especially when you get law enforcement involved, because if it's somewhere where the U.S. can still reach, they can, work with the exchange or wherever that cryptocurrency happens to be sitting. If it goes straight into somebody's cold wallet, I don't think there's a ton that you can do. But if it's still sitting at an exchange, maybe there's some opportunity to recover it and reverse that transaction.
Isn't that what they say about crypto in the first place? If it's at an exchange, it's not yours anyhow.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, I mean, if it's not yours anyhow when it's sitting in an exchange, then how is a company that's recovers crypto from exchanges like, so what? Couldn't the exchange just properly recover it for you? I don't know. Maybe it's definitely showing my ignorance of crypto for sure. Like, I definitely am not a pro in that area, but I'm not even sure how you would go about kind of tracking that back. It reminds me of the Wired article about some of the recent drug kingpin that they caught in Wired. Wired wrote up like a 6-piece article on it, and one of the ways that they caught them was tracking through the blockchain for Bitcoin transactions using chain analysis technology.
Chain analysis.
Yeah, so it is possible to track. It is possible to potentially pull back, and the question is, do you do it without? How do you do it? And that's what I would love to have somebody come on here explain that to the show. That would be an amazing discussion. Somebody who could simplify how that all truly works.
Yeah. It's I think it's pretty simple to track it. It's just you need a company or an organization like Chainalysis to actually have that giant database, in that front end that allows you to query it, to trace it, to click here, click there, and just easily follow things, or put together an investigation, almost like have an investigation platform that allows you to plug in the hashes and the accounts that you're interested in researching. But and because it's anonymous, there's details out there where you can figure out where you can de-anonymize it. Like, okay, this wallet was used in this attack, in this ransom letter, so we can tie those two things together, and we think we know which APT did that. So you need some kind of platform where you can start pulling all that stuff together when you do your investigation, and it's a all of a sudden, you can see how you can build a business around this. But it seems like everything that makes crypto bad to use or results in negative outcomes for businesses or individuals just kind of goes against the core principles of it, which is to be decentralized, to not depend on exchanges or any one control point for things. But it's almost like an exercise in why something like this maybe hasn't been successful or been done before, is because a lot of the solutions to those problems require you to then centralize stuff again and have to trust some big institution. Like, maybe it's not a bank, but it's still, you're trusting somebody to protect your stuff for you.
Yep.
Let's see. So the big one that popped up yesterday, it was late yesterday even, I think, was a rumor, and I think it's more than a rumor at this point, with Sumo Logic being acquired by $1.7 billion. So I think that's an official offer, that Sumo Logic investors will have to respond to. And I think the most notable thing here is I saw somebody mention that there's no premium. Like, they're offering to take it private for exactly what the stock is at right now. So that I don't know if that's
why would anybody take that? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, unless they're considering that they think it's overvalued and about to dump. But in that case, you'd be selling anyway. So I don't understand how they can do it without a premium.
I mean, the deal isn't closed, but it seems like
maybe the expectation is that they expect it to go down from here, which would result in a premium before close.
Yeah. So actually, in most of January, it was almost half of where it's at now. It was $7 and something, and now it's up to 12, or somewhere around 11, 12 a share. So it's actually up from where it was at the beginning of 2023. That's
been the norm for all the high tech stuff this year, though. January, February, they all found a base and have rallied. The question is, will the rug pull occur and they come back crashing back down? Or is this the start of the uptick throughout the remainder of the year? Is still to be determined. But
yeah, I don't know.
This story to me is mostly interesting, Adrian, because of the number of cyber take privates, right? Because you got Sumo Logic, we had Barracuda, we had Mimecast. We have Rapid7 exploring sales sources. There was another one too. KnowBe4 was taken private, if I recall correctly. What that means is people see an uptick value. We're depressed. Cybersecurity valuations in the public markets are believed to be depressed by those in the know, right? Those that are large enough to make acquisitions of this caliber. And they're picking them up with the expectation if they hold for 3 years, they get a 50%, 70%, whatever bump on it, and then bring it back public again, right? So that's usually a clear smart money indicator that we're near a bottom of the market.
My concern with cybersecurity in public markets was always that because of the nature of cybersecurity, and this might just be because I'm in it, and this is just me believing we're special, when maybe I should. But my concern was always, it seems like cybersecurity companies have to reinvent themselves to remain relevant and to stay in business. Like we saw what happened with Next Gen AV and the incumbents that didn't move quick enough. The McAfee's and Symantec's got dismantled and are a shadow of what they used to be, and all that happened very quickly. So I wonder if it's just not a good idea to take a security company public, because look what happened to Facebook. When Zuckerberg tried to do something drastic there, when he tried to get ahead of the market there, I think it was the wrong move. But for the sake of argument, let's say it was the right move, and he got really beat up and punished in the public market for doing that.
Yeah,
and
I think you could even just equate that to general public companies, though, Adrian, because by the time they go public, not all of them, but the majority of them at public time, they still have a pretty significant growth rate on a pretty high number, but they're in that phase of the maturity curve where they're starting to peak, to slow their growth, to turn into something that's less of a massive growth company and more of a consistent grower, right? Or you wouldn't go public, because if you're doing massive growth, you're going to still hold on to it. And so when that happens, the reasonable growth rates that sit out there are natural. Okay, I can get X% year over year pretty consistently, regularly from a growth perspective. Now, the question that you bring up, though, is will innovation tear them down? And that's tough to know. Look at Palo Alto. How long has Palo Alto Networks been public? Quite a while now. And they've done well and continue to grow and have done fairly well over time. And then others have gone out and just immediately came crashing down as something new and innovative comes out. But I think that's for software in general, all of the software companies. And that's one of the reasons why they haven't been IPOing at a rate comparably fast, on a, I guess it would be a number of deals versus number of total companies kind of ratio, right? It's gone down over the years.
But Palo Alto,
I was going to point out the Palo example too, because, they're obviously a big company and they've been successful in the public market. So do you think that a lot of this has to do with scale and diversity? Because some of these companies that are going private are a little more narrowly focused in the technologies that they offer, the products or the suites that they offer, versus something like a Palo, which is just, huge.
Yeah, 100%. You've nailed it, right? The ones that can diversify their product portfolio, make acquisitions, and pull in new markets that are innovating are the ones that will continue to grow at a higher, more substantial rate.
Yeah. For Palo Alto, I was just going to mention they've been super aggressive at making acquisitions, and jumping into new segments, even creating segments. They claim to have created the XDR segment, and it's not always the right move. McAfee and Symantec did plenty of acquisitions, but I guess you can argue, Palo Alto's been somewhat more successful at it. But they certainly knew they had to step away from selling firewalls, and expand beyond that. Mm-hmm. But so we get into the companies who are having trouble here. It's kind of a tale of, two things that can kill you here. So let's talk about Siren first, because they've been around since 1991. I don't think they properly got into security until the late 90s, early 2000s. They were creating, I think they had an email client at first. So they were doing email hosting and building software email clients initially. And then they got into anti-spam and email security in general. And I don't think they ever made that move over to, like, if you look at the proof points and the Mimecasts, into security awareness and anti-BEC and anti-phishing and stuff like that. And it was just like anti-spam. And, I think that it clearly looks like a case where they didn't move with the market. They didn't innovate as much as they needed to stay relevant.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a sad story. When I saw the news break that they were laying off the entire workforce, it was kind of a shock. I was like, wow, how could a company that was, doing well enough to go out and become, I don't think it was if I recall correctly, it was like a pink slip public, but that might be wrong. But, even just to sell enough on the public market, go to zero. Like, you don't see that very often. The zero dumpster fire just is not all that frequent of an occurrence once things have gone public, right? Because the oversight is there and people are able to actually move it forward. You may see it slow growth, but let's count that against BlackBerry. How long has BlackBerry been around? And they haven't gone to zero. They're still making money. They're still worth something. The stock is still worth something. But somehow Siren managed to run it directly into the ground.
I mean, BlackBerry had a big public painful pivot. Like moving away from phones into enterprise software. They acquired a company that does emergency announcements. I forget the name of it. They acquired a company that does real-time operating systems that are used for car infotainment systems. Like they really pivoted super hard. Enterprise software, security software, and eventually shut down all the phones and all the phone stuff. And that couldn't have been easy for them,
But yet they didn't go to zero.
No, they didn't, because they didn't react quickly enough to the market to save their phone business, but they reacted quickly enough to save the business. So Siren's on the NASDAQ, by the way.
Oh, are they? Okay. I thought they were on like a UK pink slip or something.
Not penny stocks or anything. Yeah.
Wow. It's just sad, to see people like that getting cut left and right. 121 people were axed all at the same time, taking essentially their operational capability down to zero. Their stock has come down. 98% of its peak value has been lost.
And apparently, they sold a huge chunk of their business in August, so I don't think it was completely a surprise to employees.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a little sobering when I read that, and I wasn't familiar with the company. But when you read something like that, and given what's going on in the market with layoffs and these devaluations and down rounds and all, it's definitely a little bit of a sobering moment because, as long as I've been in security, people in security have been talking about, hey, we're insulated and we're isolated and we're in a good spot because you'll always need cybersecurity with the way the world's going. And then to see a company effectively just shut its doors after all this time, it's a little scary.
Now, shifting to the other ones, IronNet and Darktrace, I think both of those were problematic for day one, but for different reasons. So IronNet, I think it was more, and I'd love to hear your takes on this, but from everything I've read, founders coming out of Autonomy, which was sold to HP, which was deeply problematic. Going into starting a cybersecurity company with some very questionable marketing, likening their product to a human immune system, among other things. Whereas IronNet, I think it was more the growth strategy that kind of killed them, like going public via SPAC, before maybe they had found market fit. It just seemed super early for them to try and go public when they were still kind of grasping for what that product is. Even I think we had somebody from IronNet on last year, and I went back and I looked at my notes, and it was clear from my notes I didn't really understand what they did.
Yeah, it's another sad story for sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what caused this one. It's tough to know, but the SPAC storyline is an interesting storyline because last year or 2 years ago, whenever the SPACs were hot and everybody was doing SPAC everything, everybody was talking about it. And in the back of my head, I knew it was kind of like, well, this is just the way to avoid the oversight of doing an IPO. This is a way to go public without having to get any oversight. And isn't inherently that just a dumb idea? But that was in the back of my head as a very thought, and I fell into, well, it's working. Yep. Everybody's getting all these SPACs, and there must be something right now. What just isn't.
Doesn't create confidence, that's for sure. Like no S1, like I don't get to see anything. I'm just going to trust this, the blank check company. I don't know about that.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll see it come around again and actually be used properly. But clearly, the SPAC world is not what it once was.
Yeah, and then I think pretty much everybody has a strong opinion about Darktrace. I remember back when I was still at 451. And you can throw up that graphic if you want to, Gus. This is the right time and place to do it. But I tried to. I was basically given. I think this was the only time when I was at 451 Research as an analyst when I was actually given an order. A project like we want you to go find Darktrace, figure out what the heck they're doing because nobody can figure this out. And it stood me up.
There's the graphic. I love it.
They stood me up on my. I went over to London for info security for the info security conference. And I don't think they just no-showed. I think they did cancel the meeting. They had there's some excuse about traffic or something like that. But it's just par for the course for all the stories I've heard about Darktrace. Where it's essentially Zeek. It's essentially NDR under the covers, but with claims that just don't match up with what you can do with Zeek and NDR at all. Just way overblown. And so this. This company that's shorting, this firm, I don't know what the right term is to call these companies. Is there a term for these companies that do this, Tyler?
Yeah, usually they're just very aggressive hedge funds that are, they essentially take a short position and then write up the reason why and publish it, right? And write it up as a research report, and it ends up pushing the stock down as people read it and learn about it.
Right. Yeah. So, the accusations in this report, I don't know if you've read any of it, Tyler, but it's basically like fake sales, fake revenue, like faking a bunch of stuff, having, shell companies to help them fake the numbers and do some creative accounting. If a quarter of the accusations in this report are true, and apparently the response to this, Darktrace's response to this, didn't challenge any of the accusations. So,
wow, yeah,
we'll be watching this one.
Many times when these short reports come out, you have to look at the source of the content, and it's biased, right? Obviously biased because they want the stock to go down because they've put a short position in play, and that is what's happening here. And generally, what happens is people discount it and say, "Okay, sure," but this one's so overwhelming. There's so much here that, like you said, even if just one or two of the allegations are true, it's a massive issue, let alone the whole report. So it's a pretty scary situation. I think the dumpster fire graphic that still remains up there on the screen is probably fairly accurate.
Yeah. All right, we can move on. We'll dispense with the graphic. All right, let's see. What's next? I just happened to run across Trend Micro the other day and saw that they created a whole subsidiary just for automotive cybersecurity, which I think it was 1-2 episodes ago. We had a group of hackers of like 6 or 8 hackers had hacked every car. Do you guys remember that story?
Yeah, that was just maybe a month ago.
Yeah, after reading that story, I can see why Trend Micro would have a whole subsidiary, and it's called VIC1, by the way, VICONE, dedicated to automotive cybersecurity. There's just more and more lines of code being pumped into cars, especially as we're getting closer and closer to, but never quite getting to self-driving.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting with that self-driving stuff. I'm not a electric vehicle person, or haven't been historically. I'm generally I like the sound of a roar of an engine, right? And have gotten cars that do that. But I'm pretty excited about maybe getting one for testing out some of the self-driving side of it, because I do think it's coming in the the next handful of years. I was reading something recently with the tax write-off stuff that you can do for an EV, an electric vehicle, and Tesla lowering the prices so that tax write-off $7,500 deduction would work for their Model 3s. People were snapping them up with the fully autonomous driving package, with the idea that they're going to turn them into robo-taxis, which I thought is a super interesting business idea. Literally just buying a fleet of cars and putting them out on the street and having it make money while you sleep.
Yeah. So there are businesses out there with the eventual goal of doing that. Now, Uber is one of them. So Uber invested in a whole self-driving car segment of their business. They had a huge investment in that. They tested it out, I think, somewhere in Pennsylvania. I forget exactly where. If it was, forget which city in Pennsylvania. But yeah, that's where. A bunch of security people went up there for that, and yeah, there are markets. There's a place again, I forget the name of the company, but there's a company somewhere in Arizona where you can get self-driving car taxis. Yep.
Well, at Black Hat last year, I know a couple of people that hopped into Ubers that had nobody in the driver's seat. Yeah, and it took more than needed to go during Black Hat last year.
Yeah, they've been testing it out in very isolated and small markets. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's super interesting, and it's going to need security people. So yeah,
I know that the food delivery, some of the bigger chain restaurants that do food delivery are also very much looking into this, because the costs are, it's so much harder for them to make money on it now that gas is expensive. Now that people don't want to work these jobs. So they're looking into it, but on a not very serious note, sure, if you're smart, you can just direct all the pizzas to your house with the pineapple and the bacon, and then direct them to Tyler's house. But there are some serious repercussions if something were to go wrong. What happens, when these cars, because they're not there yet. They're definitely not there yet. What happens when these cars cause accidents? What happens when somebody gets killed because of semi-autonomous vehicle, causes damage to somebody's property? There's so much that still needs to be worked out. I don't know if I agree that it's the next handful of years, but certainly it's coming at some point. But I think there are so many issues. And it's not just from a cybersecurity point of view. Obviously, that's concerning. Yeah. But I think it's even bigger than this. And, the mandates to go all electric, or to at least have an electric line, are there. So it's coming. But as far as the actual, cars driving around with people in them, and the majority, or even 20 or 25% of the cars on the road can be autonomous, I think we're a pretty long way away.
It sounds like we have to have a. It sounds like we have to have a little friendly gentleman/gentlewoman analyst bet on this, Miss KT, because I think it's going to be within the next 5 years.
I hope you're wrong. I hope you're wrong. I think we're so far away from them being reliable enough, but.
And don't you dare send any pineapple pizza to my house. I will be furious.
Oh, but I will.
In 5 years, if we don't see commonly self-driving vehicles all over the road, I will eat on camera a pineapple pizza.
There we go.
What's the likelihood of either of us remembering this in 5 years?
0. That's why I can say it and not worry about it.
No, it's not 0, because Adrian writes everything down.
Adrian puts it in that system that emails you in 5 years and tells you the bet you made.
Yep. If I put it in my calendar, I'm going to do that right now. I'm going to put it in my personal calendar, not even my work calendar.
Let's go. Let's
personal calendar. Yep, I'm doing it. 2028.
I will stand behind that bet.
So as far as electric cars go, not self-driving cars, but electric cars, I know that the UK has a moratorium set for 2030 that you can't sell passenger vehicles, I think, with combustion engines after 2030.
Well, that's only
and a lot of brands have said we've designed our last internal combustion engine. So I think a lot of that's going too far, because clearly we're still going to need diesel engines for a lot of stuff. You can't operate a construction site, that's, say, even 20 or 30 or 50 miles away from civilization without a lot of diesel fuel, right?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm currently leasing a vehicle that this particular luxury vehicle vendor has declared that the model year that I have is the last year that it will be a fully combustible engine. Going forward, every vehicle they make will be at least hybrid, at a minimum. And so I'm debating keeping the vehicle just for that reason alone, because I think it could be worth something someday as the last vehicle of this particular brand.
That's one of the reasons I picked up the car I got, is because I think it's going to be one of the last big combustion engine with a shift, because that's the other trend is away from free pedals. So I think the value of that car is just going to go up and up, as long as I keep it in one piece. Yeah,
we'll give it to the kids someday.
Maybe we'll see. So HashiCorp built a document management system on top of Google Workspace, which I found kind of interesting, because doesn't Google Workspace already have a document management system? So I started to dig a little bit deeper into it, and I guess I kind of get it. Like it's more of like a version control system. Like I even know people that use things like GitHub, Bitbucket for document management, because it's a lot easier to do some of that control. Like, for example, you can deprecate a document, which is not something you can do with Dropbox or Google Drive right now, which is, documents get messy in an organization. So I guess I can see why they built this, but it's called Hermes, which I believe is a messenger god. Isn't that a version of Mercury? Like there's Mercury and Hermes, or the messenger gods?
Well, Hermes is also an upscale clothing retailer, so probably not the best name for a company, because there's a very, very well-known established brand out there, but that's another issue.
It's a name for it. So it's HashiCorp. It's the name of the product, but yeah, still you run into SEO issues. Yeah. And the only reason I know that is because I used to use an email server, an email product called Hermes. And that's why it was named as. It delivers messages.
There you go.
All right. Let's see. Layoffs. There were a ton of layoffs. I didn't even post them as separate stories here. I just kind of compiled them all together. SecureWorks laid off 212 employees. NCC Group, 125. Okta, 300 employees. Siren, we talked about all their employees. Oxhunt, which I hadn't heard of before, which is a Finnish company, I think, 29 employees that's looking to expand into the U.S. And Hermetic, 30 employees. So that's all in the past 2 weeks, I think, all those layoffs. Quite a bit.
I hope Tyler's right that we're nearing the bottom.
Well, just to be abundantly clear, I wouldn't say we're nearing the bottom. I think let me rephrase that. I think we're near the bottom, but that bottom is long. It's a long bottom before we start really going up.
A long bottom.
It'll stay flat for a while, is my point, before we start to really grow.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, there are a lot of years to reverse damage from.
Where are the fun questions? Where's the uplifting stories here?
Yeah, it's been quite a dumpster fire week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just scrolling through some of the other ones, and the CISO role going through an evolution, that's not a negative article. That's number 16. how to survive below the cybersecurity poverty line. Number 17, that's it's fairly negative. And then 19 and 20, the All In podcast basically predicted, not just them predicted, they were discussing a tweet from Tom Lavero where he was predicting a mass extinction, basically saying, like, think 2008, except startups taking most of the brunt of that there. So, a lot of startups not making it through this is the prediction.
Did you read that whole Tom Lavero thread? Is there any indication in that thread of why he feels that way? I'm going to posit a guess. I haven't read the whole thread. Is it because he feels that the entire early stage investment market has been soured to those with significant money, and there's no way for kind of the startup space to raise anymore? Is that the thought process?
The thought process is that the result of 2020, 2021, 2022, the first part of 2022, too many companies being set up to where they're going to need a cash infusion and won't be able to get it, like a large one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's based on a couple things. One, the fact that companies, or the fact that the investors, the LPs that put the money into the venture capital firms, have soured. They've just seen negative returns. They've gotten burned. They're not going to put any more in, and what's there will dry up fast.
So it's really two things. It's the fact that these companies have been set up to grow fast, to need funding quicker, than it's going to be come for them, and more than will come for them. But also that there was a lot of due diligence just not happening when this money was going out. So that's another big thing that they touch on and they talk about in All In podcast is, hey, VCs, the people deploying this capital are going to have to start doing a whole lot more due diligence than they have been in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things combined is why he's predicting a mass extinction. And again, security doesn't necessarily follow all startup trends. So, we'll see about that. We do have a fun one here, though. I think I'll throw it to each of you. To you first, Tyler. You wrote a post in mid-January about the fallacy of PLG, and someone popped into your DMs or something like that and said, "Hey, I think you're full of crap, and I'd like to write a retort to that." And they did, and you published it.
It's just funny how you put it. That's the best part. Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, let me apologize for any breaking up that my audio might be doing. Gus, if I end up dying here, just cut me off and throw it over to Katie. But I wrote a piece about, what I consider the fallacy of PLG within cybersecurity and why it's a difficult delivery, a difficult way of building a go-to-market. Steve LaChance, he pinged me, and I actually had a chance meeting with him at a bar, and we talked about it. And he pinged me. He's like, "Hey, can I do a piece, and write my counterpoint?" And I said, "You know what? I love that. I love it when we can have healthy discourse and healthy debate on a topic." And I said, "Absolutely." So I gave him the opportunity to do a clap back on how PLG, product-led growth, is right for cybersecurity. And quite frankly, his points are excellent. I think he's right. It's just that, in my opinion, the number of companies that fit successful product-led growth capabilities within cybersecurity are pinpoint small. There's just not enough of them that are going to work. And so that's kind of the point that I was making, and he has some really interesting points to counter that. It's a good read.
Well, doesn't this, Tyler, actually also go back to Adrian's point about the mass extinction, too, and the oversight? Doesn't some of that have to do with the fact that when money is free-flowing, when companies feel flush with cash, you don't have to have as good a strategy, because if you just have you hit the right person at the right time with the right message, the money's there. Okay. So it doesn't matter as much as when things get a little tighter, when budgets are tighter, when scrutiny is tighter. You have to have a better strategy. And companies, at least for the past, handful of years, have been playing a little fast and loose because they could.
Honestly, I think
I love the
I read them both.
I love the connection, Katie, between the two topics. Oh, I don't know who's talking here first, Adrian. My bad, but I love the connection of the two topics, Katie. I don't know that they're I might be dying. If I'm dying, I'm sorry, guys.
No, you're not. You're not.
You were there. You just physically froze.
Okay. I love the connection between the two topics. I think, Katie, you brought up a good point. When resources are infinite and money is free, you can make very risky decisions that may or may not work out for you and live on to fight another day. And that could be driving some of the attempts at PLG, even though it's not the most natural fit for cybersecurity. For sure, I think you're right. The question is, if you do find the right one fit, you can actually do very well with PLG. And I think that's true. I do think that's true. It's just that most cybersecurities don't fit that mold. Most cybersecurity companies don't fit that mold. So he's just got some really good points. And Adrian, I apologize. I didn't hear your comments or questions.
Yeah, no, my comment is very short and concise. Basically, I read both of the essays, and I found they're both really saying the same thing. They're so you guys really agree. Like it's not so much of clapback. You're both saying PLG is great when it makes sense. But it doesn't always make sense.
Exactly.
Yep. And next, I want to throw it over to you, Katie. You've got a great post talking about how people can, specifically cybersecurity practitioners, can deal with the current layoff market. Can handle job uncertainty and position themselves well for success in this kind of market.
Again, this comes back to the arguments being a bit of a dichotomy, right? Because on the one hand, we're seeing layoffs every day. You just mentioned some great companies that are laying off a decent portion of their workforce. On the other hand, cybersecurity positions are still available. Maybe not as many as last year or the year before or 5 years ago, but the need, the demand is still there. It's still definitely there, but you can't be complacent. When the purse strings get tighter, you have to demonstrate your value. You have to be on top of things. You can't be, rolling in at 10 o'clock and then taking an hour lunch break and, all the things that not in cybersecurity necessarily, but in a lot of companies were being allowed to happen for years. I think we've all worked with people who you're like, how does this person even have a job? They don't do anything. So cyber, it's still hiring. I look at the job boards and when I've talked to people in hiring positions, both hiring managers and recruitment companies, they say, oh yeah, sure. But the hiring market's a little screwed up as well, right? It doesn't work really well. They're trying to put automation into it in places that it doesn't work so well yet. But if you're really conscientious, if you work your network, I don't mean work your network in a negative way. I mean, really be a good worker, be easy to work with, or maybe even if you're not easy to work with, because some of us aren't easy to work with, but if you provide a lot of value, you can still put yourself in a good position. And, my colleague Tanya, who I actually knew outside of work before I knew her inside of a work situation, she counsels people all the time on, look at what you're doing. Do you actually want to be doing it? Because if you go into an interview and you don't really want that job, they're going to know anyway, and you're not going to be happy and nothing's going to work out. And we hear a lot about cybersecurity, so that's something you have to consider as well.
I love the name of her business.
Yeah, she's pretty cool. She, she's just starting up a one-woman show at this point, and she's doing great things for a lot of people. A mutual colleague of ours decided after speaking with her, God, I hate what I'm doing. I hate living in the Northeast. So she bought a house, no job, moved down to South Carolina, just all based on, introspection she was able to do with Tanya. And Now she's enjoying herself. I don't know if she's employed anymore, but she bought a house down in South Carolina and is much happier.
Yeah, it's hard to get out of a rut sometimes, and it's just so easy to forget that, hey, there's other stuff out there you can be doing. I got laid off in January, and there's been no shortages of jobs to accept. But for me, one of the biggest thing is talking to people like Tanya, people who are kind of pseudo in the recruiter world, or just people who are peers, about the different opportunities out there. Because for me, being a generalist and having done so many different things, just choosing what direction to point myself in and then put some energy in that direction, because indecision isn't going to get you anywhere, right? Like I can't explore 3 different directions all at the same time. It's I guess I could, but it probably wouldn't be a good, good way to spend my energy.
No, and honestly, I've been laid off a couple of times, and the immediate shock is overwhelming, right? But after you breathe a little bit, it's actually refreshing because you go, wow, I didn't really want to be doing that anyway.
Right.
And this happened every time, every single time.
Yeah. Yep, I've been there too. Yeah, so that's a great read. That's number 22. Tyler's was number 21. Katie's was number 22. Both great reads. And Katie, yours was especially helpful to me in my current situation.
Well, I'm glad. And I am looking out for you. I keep looking to see if I can find anything, in my LinkedIn travels.
Thank you. I appreciate it. All right, let's hit some squirrel stories and wrap this thing up. I couldn't decide, so I've got 3 squirrel stories in there. How about maybe we just talk about one of them? What do you guys, which one is most interesting to you? 25, 26, 27. We've got.
I'm going to go ahead and let KT pick because my computer's crashing, so I can't read them.
Oh, okay. So I'll read the titles while you decide. There's Codebreakers decipher 50 plus Marys of Mary, Queen of Scots, because they were apparently encoded in some kind of cipher. What if Google Calendar showed the cost of a meeting, which is really just an image that somebody posted on Twitter, but man, of images that are worth 1,000 words, that one's worth a lot. And then there's sushi terrorists tamper with other diners' conveyor belt sushi.
For me, I don't know. The last 2 are really compelling for very different reasons. I love the idea of a calendar showing the cost of a meeting, because I've been struggling the last couple of months with the number of meetings on my calendar and actually getting my writing work done and getting, the actual product marketing work done that I need to get done. And for some reason, this week and next week are devoid of a lot of those meetings, and I feel so productive. I'm getting so much done. I got an entire messaging doc done today, which would have taken me like 4 days last week, right? So I love that idea. On the other hand, man, manipulating a sushi conveyor belt's pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, since we're already talking
I got to go with
it.
sushi conveyor belt. I have to.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So sushi conveyor belt, basically people are capturing this on video, but people are like picking stuff up off the. So if I've only been to one once. I visited my sister in Dallas, and we were talking about where to go for dinner. Her and her husband. And they have one of these places. They have a sushi conveyor belt place, and I had never been to one, so I was like, "Yeah, that sounds like a blast. Let's go do that." And so you can just take stuff off the conveyor belt for people who haven't been to one, and it charges you for it. Or you can custom order stuff, and it'll come around on the conveyor belt just for you. Or in our case, there was actually a little robot that came by and delivered our drinks to us. Like a little Star Wars looking robot came by with a serving platter with all our drinks on it. And apparently, like, as stuff is going by, people are just like licking the food, licking the dishes.
So awful. It's so awful.
People captured video of this, and as you can imagine, people are upset.
Yeah, I can just imagine, some sort of robot. You reach for your sake or your tamago, and a robot reaches out and grabs it back, and you're like, but I wanted that.
Yeah, so people also taking other people's stuff is also part of the trend.
That's very sad. Wait, Tyler, hold on. Since you don't like pineapple on pizza, do you like sushi?
Yes, I love sushi. I just don't like conveyor belt sushi.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. Because you don't like chocolate either.
No, chocolate's gross. Sushi is amazing. It's fantastic stuff.
There's a security angle here because this is a system. The conveyor belt sushi restaurant relies heavily on trust, right? Everyone can access that conveyor belt, and that's basically what's being demonstrated here. Is if we want to throw this thing into anarchy, all it takes is one customer to throw the whole system, the whole way that the restaurant operates, into anarchy. And we've seen this before with the internet, like the time that. I'm going to blank on his name, but that one guy found all the open printer ports in the world and sent Nazi propaganda to it, and started printing out Nazi propaganda on any raw jet direct port he could find exposed to the internet. And universities everywhere had Nazi propaganda printing on it. So yeah, it only takes one person to throw a heavily trust-based system. Like the way universities set up their networks, into complete chaos and anarchy.
I just had a vision of robots making the sushi and putting way too much wasabi in sushi and really pissing off diners.
Wasabi hack.
Oh, God.
Tyler probably loves that idea. He's probably thinking about how to do it.
No, it's totally funny because I love wasabi. I would, if you overloaded my wasabi, I'd be fine.
All right. Unless you want to talk about the calendar one a bit, which honestly was my favorite, we could wrap here.
No, I don't want to talk about the calendar one. I'll tell you specifically why, because it would be so depressing to see the amount of hours that get wasted in meetings.
It would. So, for those listening, you'll have to go check out the show notes. I highly recommend checking it out. It's very visually powerful. This image of applying actual dollar costs of a meeting to a Google Calendar entry to tell you how much that meeting is costing the company. It's a really cool one, or depressing, as Tyler. Depends on your perspective. It might help you push just this image alone. I plan on using in the future as a strategy to push back on having frivolous meetings. So
love it.
Could be useful to you. Thanks so much, Tyler, working through your internet issues, sticking with us today. Thank you, Katie.
Thank you, as always, Adrian.
And a big thanks to everyone for watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We've got a great episode next week. Don't miss it. We'll be talking with Space Rogue about his new book. See you then.